There are things a son never forgets, not because they were loud, but because they were silent in all the wrong ways. Jake never forgot the night his father lit a fire in their backyard, stared straight into his eyes, and let a photograph curl into ash. That photo was the first real image of Jake with Noah, and it was the last time he saw his father as just a man, and not a wall he'd never break through. Jake Miller grew up in a house built on discipline, tradition, and silence. His father, Chief Raymond Miller, had served the town of Dalton for decades, stern, respected, and relentless. The kind of man who spoke in commands and taught his sons how to load a rifle before they turned 12. His younger brother Ryan was everything their father wanted: sharp, athletic, already enrolled in police academy. Jake was quieter, drawn more to sketchbooks than squad cars. He followed the rules, nodded at the right moments, laughed when he was supposed to. But inside, he was splintering. There had been signs, even when Jake didn't have the language to name them. He remembered standing too close to his best friend at recess, feeling warmth that wasn't just friendship. He remembered staring too long in the locker room mirror, wondering if he could ever say what lived behind his eyes. But in the Miller household, feelings were treated like rumors. You kept them out of the house or you kept them buried. Jake did what he was taught, he performed. He dated girls he didn't love, joined summer patrol camps, even applied for the same internship his father once had, but nothing fit. Not the uniform, not the gaze he was supposed to hold, not the way people expected him to walk, talk, or live. It wasn't until he met Noah that something finally clicked into place. Noah was not from Dalton. He was studying journalism at a nearby university, just passing through town to write about local heroes. They met during a community cleanup event. When Jake was assigned to guide volunteers, Noah asked too many questions, smiled too often, and called Jake by his full name like it mattered. They ended up sitting under a tree during lunch, talking about nothing and everything. Jake had never felt seen before. Not like that. It started small. Coffee runs, midnight walks, a hand on the back that lingered too long. Jake kept telling himself it wasn't what it looked like, but it was. The turning point came during a trip to the lake. It was the end of summer. The air was warm and forgiving. Noah had brought his camera, said he wanted to remember what small towns felt like. At one point, he set the timer, wrapped his arm around Jake's shoulders, and kissed his cheek. Jake didn't flinch. He smiled. The shutter clicked. Jake took that photo home and hid it in his wallet. He didn't know why. Maybe part of him wanted proof that for one moment in his life, he didn't feel wrong. That single image was the first thing in years that felt like truth. But the truth doesn't always stay hidden. It was his mother who found the photo while doing laundry. She didn't say anything at first, just slipped it onto the counter next to Jake's keys and walked away. When he returned home from a shift, it was gone. So was his father's usual stillness. Jake walked into the backyard and saw the fire pit glowing. His father stood over it with the photo in hand. He didn't yell, didn't ask. He simply looked at Jake and said, "You want to ruin your life? Go ahead, but you won't ruin this family." The picture burned before Jake could even open his mouth. He didn't sleep that night. He packed a duffel bag and left before sunrise. His mother didn't stop him. Ryan didn't come out of his room. The Miller house stayed silent, as it always had. Jake ended up in a small town just outside the city, got a job at a diner, rented a room above a garage, changed his number. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd go back when things calmed down, but the ache in his chest wasn't from distance. It was from something he could never retrieve: a boy, a photo, and a moment where he was allowed to be someone else, someone whole. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to follow Heart Stories. There's more coming stories that need to be told. And maybe one day, yours. Jake didn't speak to anyone from Dalton after he left. He didn't return Noah's messages either. There were a few, at first short ones. "Are you okay? I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Talk to me." But Jake didn't know how to talk anymore. Every time he thought of Noah, he saw flames. He saw his father's face, frozen in controlled rage, and he heard that sentence again. You won't ruin this family. So Jake let the messages pile up unread. He worked the morning shift at a diner just off the highway, wore a name tag that said Jay because he couldn't bear the full version anymore. The owner didn't ask questions. She liked that he was quiet and showed up on time. That was enough. Nights were harder. He didn't dream much, but when he did, it was always the same, the photo again, untouched this time, glowing in Noah's hand. Then it burned, again and again. Sometimes he woke up with his fists clenched, the muscles in his jaw aching from grinding his teeth. He didn't date, didn't even try. The fear wasn't about being rejected, it was about being seen. If someone looked too close, they might see how much had been lost, how little was left. He told himself this was peace, no expectations, no pretending, just work, sleep, repeat. But the lie wore thin. One night during his shift, a couple walked in, two men. They sat in the booth by the window, laughing about something one of them had said. It wasn't the way they touched hands across the table or how one leaned his head on the other's shoulder. It was how normal it looked, how undeservedly free it felt. Jake spilled coffee on a receipt and had to excuse himself to the back hallway just to breathe. It was there, leaning against a wall of cardboard boxes, that he allowed himself to whisper, "What if I'd stayed?" He hadn't thought about Ryan in months. His younger brother had always been the golden child, confident, straightforward, never had to fight for approval. He was born into it. The last time they spoke was a year ago, when Jake had just started seeing Noah. Jake had tried to explain it, not the whole thing, just enough to test the waters. Ryan had blinked slowly, like trying to calculate damage. Then he said, "You really want to do this to Dad?" That was the end of the conversation. Jake didn't blame Ryan. That family had taught them both to protect the system before they protected each other. Their father didn't raise sons, he raised soldiers. About 9 months after leaving, Jake got a letter. Not a text, not an email, an actual letter, folded inside a plain white envelope with no return address. He almost didn't open it, but something about the handwriting, small, tight, and familiar, made him pause. Inside were just a few lines. "She's not doing well. She keeps asking about you, but won't say your name out loud. He still pretends you don't exist. I don't know what's right anymore, but I thought you should know." It wasn't signed, but Jake didn't need a name. Ryan still didn't say much, but when he did, it was always just enough. He sat with the letter for hours, read it again in the morning, memorized the way the word exist looked in Ryan's handwriting. He didn't want to go back, but he also couldn't pretend he'd never been part of that family, that house, that silence. He packed a small bag, left the diner keys on the hook. He didn't tell anyone goodbye. It wasn't that kind of town, and maybe, deep down, he believed he wasn't gone for good, just paused. When he got off the bus in Dalton, it was late. The town hadn't changed. Same narrow roads, same gas station with the flickering sign, but Jake had changed. Every step toward that old house felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from memory. The porch light was off. His old key still worked. Inside, nothing had moved. The same framed family photo on the wall, Jake cropped out by shadow and coincidence. The same leather chair where his father read the news. The same silence. But then he heard it, a cough, then a rustle. His mother, pale and thinner than he remembered, stood in the hallway in her robe. She didn't speak. She just stared, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked. Jake opened his mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came. Her voice broke first. "I knew you'd come back. Just not like this." Jake sat at the kitchen table like a stranger in his own memory. Everything was familiar, yet nothing felt safe. The ceramic fruit bowl still sat at the center, untouched, fake apples collecting dust. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder now, like it was keeping time for something that had already passed. His mother moved slowly, like each step cost her a memory she wasn't ready to lose. She poured him a glass of water with trembling hands. Her eyes never quite met his, but they kept searching like she was looking for the boy who used to live in that body, not the man who had returned. Neither of them mentioned the photo. Neither spoke his father's name. It was a silence Jake had grown up with, but now it felt heavier, almost deliberate. She finally broke it, whispering, "You're thinner." Jake almost laughed of all the things to say, but he only nodded. They sat like that for what felt like hours, until she pushed something across the table. An envelope, worn, faded, but sealed. "I kept it," she said. "All this time, I knew one day you'd need it more than I did." Inside was a single photograph, a scanned copy of the one his father had burned. It was slightly grainy, but still clear, Noah's head resting on Jake's shoulder. Both of them laughing, sunlight streaking across their faces. Jake hadn't seen that image in over a year. His throat closed up. His hands shook as he touched the paper. "You copied it," he whispered. She nodded. "I watched him throw the original into the fire, and I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just made a copy the night before. I couldn't stop him, but I didn't want him to erase you." Jake's chest ached, not from anger, but from the weight of all the unsaid things. "Why didn't you say something back then?" Her reply came low and hollow. "Because I grew up in the same silence I passed on to you." Then, like a tide long held back, she began to speak. Not about Jake, but about a brother he never knew existed. His mother had once had an older sibling, Aaron, a boy with quiet eyes and a crooked smile. Aaron had left home at 18 and never came back. The family told everyone he moved for work. In truth, he had been found with another boy in the barn behind their property, and her father, their grandfather, beat him so badly he couldn't walk for days. The next morning, Aaron was gone. No note, no goodbye, only a stain on the floor and a silence that swallowed his name. Jake stared at her. "You never told me." She looked down. "Because I believed silence kept things safe, until I realized it only keeps them buried." That night, Jake walked into his childhood bedroom. It was cleaner than he remembered. The posters were gone, the bedding replaced, like someone had erased him softly, politely. He lay on the bed fully clothed, the photo on the nightstand, for the first time since leaving. He let himself cry, not from fear, not from shame, but from all the years spent folding himself into a shape others could tolerate. He remembered Noah's last message, never opened, still saved. He reached for his phone and logged into his old account. It took time, but he found it. Just a sentence, "I hope you find your voice before the silence does." The words echoed. Maybe Noah had known all along. Maybe he hadn't just left. Maybe he had waited for a version of Jake who could stand still and not flinch at his own reflection. Before he fell asleep, Jake looked out the window toward the backyard. The fire pit was still there, cold, empty, but its ashes had long since washed away. Jake woke to the low hum of voices outside the kitchen, familiar, restrained, and coded in the way only families who've trained themselves not to say too much can manage. He rose quietly, following the sound, and found his younger brother Ryan seated opposite their mother, still in uniform, his badge glinting under the morning light. Jake hadn't seen him up close in over a year, but the posture remained upright, regulated, and deliberate, like their father. The room fell into silence the moment Jake stepped in. No one said his name. Ryan gave a brief nod, one that suggested obligation more than warmth. Their mother offered the only bridge between them. "He came by to check on me." Jake poured himself coffee, not because he wanted it, but because it gave his hands something to do. The tension was not new, but its weight had changed. It no longer hovered in expectation. It pressed down with consequence. Ryan cleared his throat. "There's something you should know, and you should hear it from me before it spreads any further." He took a folded piece of paper from his inner pocket and placed it on the table. Jake hesitated, then opened it. A printed article timestamped just days earlier bearing the headline, "Whistleblower alleges pattern of suppression and misconduct within Dalton Police Department." The article detailed an anonymous report alleging that the department, under Chief Raymond Miller, had systematically suppressed internal complaints, particularly those related to minority and LGBTQ+ civilians and officers. The piece cited a series of redacted testimonies, policy inconsistencies, and internal emails obtained through a protected leak. One voice, however, was not redacted: Noah Ellison. Jake froze. Ryan continued, his tone even but subdued. "He submitted the file through a protected channel, and he didn't name you directly, but he mentioned retaliation, a photo, an incident with the chief." Jake's stomach turned. The image resurfaced in his mind: the fire pit, the photo curling at the edges, and the silence that followed. He hadn't seen Noah since that summer, hadn't spoken a word to him. And now Noah had done what Jake had never dared. He named the machine. He pointed at it and said, "This is broken." Jake's voice came low, almost a whisper. "How bad is it?" Ryan hesitated. "They've started an internal audit. Outside investigators have been called in. Dad's on leave until the review is done." Jake processed that in silence. He had imagined his father's fall 100 ways, all of them loud and explosive. But this quiet unraveling, seeded from within by someone Jake had once loved and then left, was more surgical. It cut deeper. Their mother stood and left the room, as if sensing what needed to follow didn't include her. The air between the brothers thickened. For the first time since childhood, Jake saw uncertainty in Ryan's eyes. Ryan spoke again. "I don't know if what Noah did was right, but I think it was necessary." Jake studied him. "And what do you think about me now?" The pause stretched. "I think you should have never had to leave to be who you are, and I think I didn't do enough. But I'm here now." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. Later that day, Jake walked to the local community center. He stood in front of a bulletin board covered with flyers, grief groups, addiction meetings, ESL classes. Among them was a printed page advertising a town hall forum on departmental accountability and community trust. He recognized the moderator's name, Noah Ellison. Jake stood there for a long time, not reading the flyer but listening to the voices around him. Real voices, unfiltered. Some angry, some curious, some afraid. And for the first time, Jake didn't feel like an outsider looking in. Back at the house, he sat at his old desk, opened his laptop, and typed a message he had never thought he would send. "You didn't give up. I'm not sure I deserve to say this now, but thank you. I saw what you did. I read every word. You didn't just tell the truth, you told mine. I don't know what happens next, but if you're willing, I'd like to talk." He hit send before he could second guess it. He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't need forgiveness, not yet. But he needed to show up for the conversation. The silence had lasted long enough. The old town hall hadn't changed in decades. Yellow light buzzed from overhead fixtures, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, filled with faces Jake both recognized and didn't. Retired officers, city workers, neighbors who once shook his father's hand at parades. The seal of Dalton hung on the back wall, above the podium where Chief Raymond Miller had given more speeches than Jake could count. But this time, his father didn't stand at the podium. He sat near the front, hands clenched on his knees, flanked by lawyers and silence. His uniform was crisp, but something in him had collapsed. Something beyond rank. He didn't look smaller, just emptied. Jake stood by the wall at the back of the room, out of sight, heart pounding beneath his jacket. He hadn't planned to speak. He only came to listen, to watch Noah if Noah was even coming. The forum began with statements from the mayor and a few committee members. Then a pause, a shift, a question. "Is there anyone here who would like to share a personal experience connected to the report?" Jake's breath caught. No one moved. Chairs creaked. Then a hand went up, not from the front, But from the middle of the room, it wasn't Noah, it was his mother. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she stood, visibly shaken but steady. She walked to the microphone, ignoring the tug of a committee aide trying to stop her. Jake watched in stunned silence. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I want to speak not as the wife of a police chief, but as the mother of a boy who was almost erased." The room fell silent. She didn't look at her husband. She looked straight ahead. "I watched a photo burn. I watched my son disappear, and I said nothing. I want that silence to end today." A murmur moved through the crowd. "You don't have to agree with who he is. You don't have to understand everything. But I will not allow this family, my family, to be remembered by what it tried to bury." I kept a copy of that photo, and I keep it now, not as defiance, but as truth. She stepped back. The microphone wavered in her hand. Then she sat down alone. Jake stood frozen. His mother, who once said nothing, had just done what no one else in that room had told the truth without armor. An older man on the panel whispered something to the mayor. Then another pause. Then the same question again, directed now with more weight. "Anyone else?" Jake stepped forward. He didn't plan what he would say. He didn't even realize he was moving until the crowd parted and he was at the microphone, face to face with the town that once taught him shame. "My name is Jake Miller. You probably know who my father is, but you don't know me. Not really." No one interrupted, not even his father. "For years, I lived in fear of disappointing this room, this town. I left because I thought that was my only way to survive. But survival without truth isn't living." He took a breath. His voice steadied. "You may think I'm standing here today because of what my father did, but I'm here because of someone else, someone brave enough to tell the truth first. And because my silence ended the day I saw my mother take it back." He pulled something from his pocket, the copied photo. He held it up for the room to see. "This is not rebellion. This is a memory. And I will not burn it again." A few people applauded. A few didn't move. His father didn't look up, but Jake didn't need him to. When the forum ended, Jake stepped into the cool night air, lungs filling like he hadn't breathed in years. And there, across the street, under the flickering street lamp, stood Noah, hands in pockets, waiting. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. Noah walked up, pulled something from his coat, and handed it over. It was a photo, a new one. Taken just weeks ago, two young men in a different town hall, holding hands at a protest, faces hopeful, unapologetic. "I thought maybe it was time for a new one," Noah said quietly. Jake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "This one's not going anywhere." They stood there in the dark, not holding on, but not letting go either. Not yet. Somewhere behind them, the fire pit still sat cold. But Jake knew now not all flames destroy. Some just light the way home. Have you ever kept a part of yourself hidden to protect someone else's expectations? What would you say to your younger self if you could share it in the comments? You never know who needs to hear it. Follow Heart Stories for more stories that fight silence with truth and remind you you were never meant to disappear.